Okay, welcome back. We're looking at October, November 2022, question paper 12. Now, just before I start into this, there are 9 questions in this paper which are the exact same as questions from component 11. That video is also uploaded on the OneDrive. So I will just be circling the correct answer for those questions. You can go back to question paper 11, that video, if you want to get the explanation for those answers. So this one should be relatively quick. If we start at question 30, what combination of factors would attract a multinational company producing smartphones to operate in a low-income country? So we're looking for 2 positive rates. High economic growth. Yeah, that's going to be a positive. That's a good thing for a company wanting to move to a low-income country. Low corporation tax. Yeah, that's a positive. A limited supply of skilled workers is a negative, so we can cross that out. Strict employment laws is also a negative, so we can cross that out. Now, would they want the supply of workers who they can get for cheap labour, or would they want a competitive local market? Of course they're going to want the high economic growth rate and supply of cheap labour. If there's the ability for if the country is growing, there's going to be an increase in the demand for goods and services, and if they can get cheap labour in that country, then that means that they can keep their cost of production very low also. If the market is competitive, firms that are already operating in that country will already have a large control of the market share. So it might be difficult for the multinational to come in and to take that market share away from their competitors. Okay, what is a restriction for 29 on the quantity of imports called? So restriction on the quantity of imports is a quota. It's a limit that's placed on the number of imports that can come into a country. Dumping is a practice that happens from countries. Explanation is in previous exam papers also for dumping, where a country has a surplus of goods and services. Let's say they've got a load of smartphones left over. What they're going to do is they're going to sell those smartphones in another country below the cost of production. So they'll actually take a loss on it because they want to get rid of them. A subsidy is free money that's given to firms, so it's not a restriction on imports. And a tariff is a form of protectionism measure, but a tariff is not a restriction on the quantity. A tariff is just a tax that's placed on imports. So it's a tax that's used to increase the price of the imports and to restrict the quantity, but it's not necessarily a restriction on the number of imports that can come into the country. If people still want to buy the imports, they can still buy them. They will just have to pay a higher price to do so. Okay, question 28 is a question from question paper 11. Go to my explanation there. Correct answer is C. Question 27 is the exact same. Explanation is on the question paper 11 video. Correct answer is A. Question 26. A fall in the level of absolute poverty can be best achieved by reducing. Okay, so if you reduce unemployment benefits, what's that going to do? That's going to increase poverty levels, right? Because that means that people who don't have a job are going to be getting less money when they're not working than they were previously. If you reduce the rate of inflation, that's also not going to reduce absolute poverty. Why? Because what could happen, or what could possibly happen, is that will result in unemployment rising. Okay, especially if the rate of inflation results in a shift in AD to the left, and that may result in GDP going down, and therefore it may result in us having less output, less employment, less national income, and less living standards. So we're left between income tax and the number of homeless people. Now we need to look at the definition. We're told it's absolute poverty. And what's absolute poverty? That's not being able to afford basic necessities of life, right? So food, water, shelter, etc. Now what's going to best reduce that? If we reduce income tax, what's going to happen is that people are going to have more money and they're going to be able to spend that money. But that's not going to help the people that can't afford the basic necessities. If we're able to reduce the number of homeless people, that means that we'll have less people living in absolute poverty, because they'll be able to meet these requirements here. Shelter. More people will be able to have shelter if we've less homeless people, and that's one of the things they can't afford when they're in absolute poverty. Okay, what is included in the HDI? Very similar to the question from question paper 11 also. In question paper 11 we explained that the HDI includes life expectancy, and it includes years of schooling, and it includes income per head, but it does not include environmental sustainability and some other factors. Notes and slides on the components of HDI, and there's a number of different components of it, so components are what it is made up of, are all given. You can check on the OneDrive there. So the correct answer here would be C. Does include life expectancy, it does include the years of schooling, it does not include gender equality, and it does not include environmental sustainability. Okay, question 24 is also from QP11. Correct answer is D. To check the calculation that's done, just go back and watch that video. Okay, table shows changes in economic growth and inflation. What changes are likely to happen as a result of rising unemployment? Okay, so first thing we need to do is, if we have rising unemployment, we can make an assumption that AD has moved to the left, right? So our real GDP has gone down, national income has gone down, employment has gone down, and living standards have gone down. Therefore, if GDP goes down, economic growth has to fall, right? Because our economic growth is linked to our real GDP. And if AD moves to the left, we know that that should result, or is likely to result, in the level of inflation falling. GDP goes right, inflation goes up. AD goes right, inflation goes up. AD goes left, inflation comes down. Okay, question 22. What is most likely to cause inflation? So now we're thinking the opposite of 23. What is going to move AD to the right? And we can use process of elimination here, right? Or what is going to move AS to the left? Because we have two types of inflation. We have cost push, which is where cost of production will rise, right? And AS will move left. So that's the cost of production increasing. Or we have AD moving to the right, where we use expansionary fiscal policy or expansionary monetary policy. So if we have a reduction in imports, what's that going to do? That's going to move AD to the left. So that would actually reduce inflation, not cause inflation. Remember that our components of AD are C, I, G, and X minus M, exports minus imports. So if exports goes down, X minus M would go down and AD would go left. If we reduce government spending, AD would go left. And why would it do so? Because that is a contractionary fiscal policy. Remember, expansionary is taxes down, government spending up. Contractionary is taxes up, government spending down. Similarly, if we increase the rate of interest, AD will go left, because that is contractionary monetary policy. So finally what we're left with is an increase in trade union power. Now what's that going to do? That's going to cause cost push inflation, or it's most likely out of these reasons to cause that. Because if the trade unions get more power, what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and negotiate better deals for their employees. And if they negotiate better deals for their employees, that may result in the employees getting higher wages. And if higher wages go up, that will result in the cost of production increasing and can result in AS shifting left, having us leaving in a state of cost push inflation. Okay, what's a definition of the unemployment rate? So remember, the definition of somebody who's unemployed is somebody who doesn't have a job but is willing and able or seeking a job. Therefore, in this case, the correct answer is B. Number of people without a job but seeking a job as a percentage of the labour force. So remember, the unemployment rate is only calculated as a percentage of the labour force because the labour force is people who are of working age. In most countries that's aged or ages between 18 to 64. You're not going to be classified as unemployed if you're 10 years old and you don't have a job but you're going to school. Only when you reach working age can you be classified as unemployed if you're actively seeking a job. Okay, an individual decides to employ a professional decorator rather than buying the materials and decorating her house herself. What would cause, or why would this decision cause GDP to rise? So remember, what's GDP? GDP is our output, right? And how is our output measured? Oh God, sorry, let me write that again. Output is essentially the goods and the services that we're producing. So if the professional decorator would work less efficiently, that's not going to affect the GDP, is it? That's just something that happens for the person who employed him. If they can purchase the materials at a discount, that also doesn't affect it. The output is the final material or the final good or service that's done, not the cost of the material or the cost of the service. It's the final output. Individual would have more leisure time also does not affect GDP, but if the activity is recorded as income for the decorator, that is the value of the output that's generated, so GDP would go up because of that. Okay, the diagram shows a country's economic growth rate over a 5-year period. What can be concluded from the diagram? So, can we conclude that output fell during the period? No, because in year 2, output is still increasing by 3% more than year 1. In year 3, it's increasing here by 1% more than year 2. So it's not falling throughout the period. Output was at its highest in year 1. That's also incorrect. Remember that they run in line with each other. So what I mean by that is year 1 we're 5% higher than the year previously, but in year 2 we're 3% higher than what we were in year 1. And in year 3 we're 1% higher than where we finished in year 2. So the output would actually be at its highest in the last year because we have a plus figure here, we have positive economic growth. So we would be 2% higher than we were in year 4. And output was at its lowest in year 4. Again, not true. Because actually in year 4, if we go down by -1 and we went +1 in year 3, our output would be the same over that 2-year period. Okay, where am I? Oh, 18, yeah. Okay, a central bank reduces interest rates. What would not be a consequence of this action? So remember, what happens when we reduce interest rates? People borrow more and save less. because they're getting less money from the bank for keeping their money in the bank, and they're getting a smaller rate of money they have to pay back to the bank so they can borrow more. Now, what would not be a consequence? A benefit for borrowers receiving loans. Well, we've already seen they'll borrow more because they get a benefit. A fall in the international value of the currency. So what do we call that? We call that a depreciation. And a depreciation would actually happen if we reduce the interest rates. Why? Because there's less demand for money to be kept in our bank accounts. So to give you an example, if China reduces its interest rates, just as a standard example, what that means is that the demand for the currency will be less because people will be moving their money out of China and into other countries instead, where they can get better interest rates from keeping their money in those banks. Would it result in a reduction in inflation? No. It would result in an increase in inflation because it's an expansionary monetary policy, so AD would move to the right. But what it would do, or not a consequence, oh sorry, I read the question wrong. Apologies. It would result in an increase in AD, not a consequence is the question. So C is the correct answer. A reduction in inflation would not happen because AD moves to the right, whereas an increase in GDP would happen because AD moves to the right. We only reduce inflation by AD moving to the left, and that was explained in previous answers. Okay, question 17. The table shows the rate of income tax paid at different levels. What can we see here? So we need to know our three different types, and our three types are progressive, proportional, and regressive. Okay, and really it's very simple. Progressive, the more money you earn, the higher the percentage of tax that you pay. Regressive, the more money you earn, the smaller the percentage of tax that you pay. And proportional, irregardless of your income level, you will pay the same proportion of your income. Okay, so then we can clearly see this is a progressive tax because as the income here increases, the rate of tax that's paid will also increase. Okay, which pair is included in the government's budget? Again, very similar to QP11. Public expenditure and tax revenue. The two elements of a government budget are government revenue and government expenditure. And public expenditure is just another word for government expenditure. Investment and savings is not included in a government's budget. Consumption and factor income is also not included. And exports and imports are not included also. They're included in trade balances. Okay, what statement is correct when comparing small firms with large firms? Small firms have higher total fixed cost and lower average fixed cost. That's not true. They're likely to have smaller total fixed costs because they're making less products than big firms. They benefit from low cost per unit from economies of scale. That's also not true. Economies of scale happens as a firm gets bigger. So the bigger firm is likely to have lower cost per unit than the smaller firm. They're able to reduce competition through barriers to entry. Again, that's false. That is something that a large firm could do because they may be a monopoly. And a monopoly can create high barriers to entry, making it difficult for competitors to enter the industry. But what they will be able to do, because they're a small firm, is they'll be able to adapt to changes in the market conditions more easily than a large firm who has a load of different layers to go through to adapt to those conditions. Communication, production layers, etc., making it more difficult. A small firm can change very easily. Okay. Which effect of increased specialization by firms and workers is most likely to cause problems for an economy? So, this is a difficult question, right? But again, use the process of elimination. Would having improved resource allocation cause problems for an economy? Definitely not. It's a positive thing for an economy. Would higher productivity cause problems for an economy? Definitely not, because it's going to help our economy grow. And would better quality products cause problems for an economy? Definitely not, because that's what we want for our consumers. We want them to have better quality products at lower prices. So having greater independence may cause problems for economies. Why? Because they're going to be making decisions not relying on other people. So it may mean that they make decisions which are incorrect in certain circumstances. Okay, question 13. So, the central bank of a country decreases interest rates, expansionary monetary policy, to help the economy out of a recession. How is this decrease in interest rates most likely to affect the levels of saving and borrowing? Okay, great. So we literally just went through this. If I come back down here, we're reducing interest rates here, and what did we say? We borrow more and we save less, because we get less of a return on the money we keep in the bank, but we can borrow at a cheaper rate, so we have to pay back less money to the bank. So if we find that here, saving we know is going to go down, and borrowing we know is going to increase. Okay, question 12, question 11, question 10 and question 9 are all from QP11. Explanations are provided in there. I'll just circle the correct answers and then I'll go straight into question 8. Again, go back to the QP11 video for these questions if you want to get the detailed explanations on their answers. Okay, so question 8. Again, this is actually a relatively difficult question, I think. To reduce traffic congestion, a government decides to build a new road. There is a toll charge on the new road. What is the main purpose of this government intervention? So first of all, to ensure the supply of transport through the free market is not a purpose of government intervention. They don't need to do that. To discourage people from using public transport, well, putting a tax on public transport would discourage them, but they're not taxing public transport. They're taxing a new road, which is people that are going to be driving on the road themselves, private individuals. So what we're left with is to obtain revenue from the levy of a toll. So a toll is like a kind of tax that they're going to collect money from, or to address the problem of market failure. Now what's the key in the question? The key is that they're told us why have they done it. They have done it to reduce traffic congestion. So what they're telling us is that the traffic congestion would be an external cost, right? And an external cost results from demerit goods. And how do we fix demerit goods? We need to reduce the consumption of them. So demerit goods are an example of market failure. Therefore, because it's an external cost that they're trying to reduce the consumption of through the toll charge, the main purpose would be to address market failure. Of course, it's possible that they just want to obtain revenue from the levy of a toll. That would be the main purpose if they don't give us a hint here about the fact that it's to do with external costs. And we know that's associated with demerits and reducing consumption. Okay, definition of PED. I won't spend too long on this. You can go look at your definition of PED. It's on the first slide of the PED chapter, I believe. It is the responsiveness of quantity demanded of a product to a change in the price of that product. It is not relating to a change in the price of a substitute. It is not relating to the response to the change of a price in a complement. And it is not responding to a change for quantity demanded to a change in income of consumers. Okay, the diagram shows changes in market conditions. Which diagram shows a shortage at price P? So, remember what a shortage is. A shortage is the existence of excess demand. So our demand will be higher than our supply. So if we go through the diagrams here, in this diagram at a price of P, what do we see? We've moved to a new equilibrium because supply has moved right and demand has moved right. So we're at a new equilibrium. Demand equals to supply in this case. Here, what's happened? Demand or supply is shifted, but we're still at the same point. So demand is still equal to supply. We're still in equilibrium. In B, we start here and we shift the supply. Now what's happening? Now the supply is higher than the level of demand at price P. Here we would be on supply and we would be here on demand, right? So what is that? That is going to be the existence of a surplus, which is another word for excess supply. So the correct answer will be A, and we can see because here we've shifted demand, so our demand is at this level at this price, but our supply is still here. So this gap shows that the demand is higher than the supply, which is what we call a shortage, excess demand. Okay, workers are awarded a pay rise, but they do not increase their productivity. Workers do not buy the product that they produce, right? So they've been given a pay rise, but they do not increase their productivity. So what's going to be affected? Workers' pay is to do with the cost of production, right? And what we know is that when the cost of production goes up, that results in the supply curve shifting to the left, because it now becomes more expensive for the firm to make the product because they have to pay people more money, but they're producing the same level of output. So therefore they will release less supply onto the market because they're going to be making less profit. Now if the workers increased their productivity, then we might have different shifts in demand or supply. But they tell us they don't increase their productivity, so they're making the same amount of products and the cost of production for the business has gone up. Okay, question 4. What is a disadvantage of a market economy? So, consumer choice is ignored is not true. Consumer choice is what dictates a market economy. It's actually an advantage because the choice that consumers will get will mean that more competition will be created. Government subsidies encourage efficiency. That can't be a disadvantage because we know there's no government involvement in a market economy. And there's no incentive to work is not true. If there's no government involvement, everybody has to work, otherwise they're not going to be paid. But what we do know is that they'll lack information. There will be the existence of information failure in a market economy. And that information failure, lack of information, is one of the reasons why demerit goods will be over-provided and over-consumed, and merit goods will be under-provided and under-consumed. Okay, Question 3. The diagram shows a production possibility curve and a number of output combinations for tea and coffee. What combinations of tea and coffee could the economy currently produce? Okay, so remember with your PPC, we can never produce at a point that is outside the PPC. Why? It shows scarcity. We don't have enough resources to make Y, and we don't have enough resources to make Z. We do have enough resources to make X and Y, and we do have enough resources to make U and V, even though at U and V, because they are inside the curve, we would be allocating resources inefficiently. We still have that level of resources to make those quantities of those goods. So correct answer would be B. Okay, 2 and 1 are also from question paper 11. So again, go to that question paper for the explanations of those answers. I just circled the correct answers, and thank you very much for listening. This was a short one.